So I want to introduce him to you all. The next presenter is Spencer Stryker. He obtained a PhD in digital media and now serves as associate professor of digital media design at Northwestern University in Qatar. He has a diverse background and multiple talents. He grew up first in New England, but then he lived and worked in many countries in Europe, in the Americas, and in the Middle East. So I recommend you see his personal website later. One of his works is History Adventures, World of Characters, a free interactive digital learning series that presents a fresh approach to history education, combining mobile entertainment technology with the power of narrative design. So now it's your turn, Professor Stryker.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thanks for that awesome presentation as well. Can everyone hear me okay? The audio is good?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, great. So today I want to showcase two different digital learning products. I'll just quickly reintroduce myself. Nobu did a wonderful job. I'm here in Qatar. I'm a professor. I'm an associate professor of digital media design at Northwestern University in Qatar. It's quite early here right now. It's 4:35 a.m., but I don't mind. I'm a big fan of IBHA, and I'm glad to be here and be able to present some work. So my work really focuses on, again, digital learning design. And my big project I've been working on for a number of years now is called History Adventures. And the big idea there is really to sort of get young people engaged with history, to sort of refute the idea that history is boring. I was just at the ISTE conference in Philadelphia, ISTE, you probably all know about that. It's the big international EdTech conference. And we have actually some funding from NSF, National Science Foundation, to do what's called customer discovery work. It's basically, the idea is, how do you figure out who would actually use History Adventures and why would they use it and what value could we possibly add and so on. So it's kind of like reality checking all of your assumptions about in this case, the digital learning product you're building. And yeah, we heard again and again some very some things that are in the ether with regard to history education, and one of them is the idea that young people often ask, what's the point of history? It's done. Well, it's not now, so it's in the past, so it's not relevant. So the big thing is often a relevancy issue. Why do I care? And another one is just why they say it's boring is because they can't see themselves in it. Again, it's another side of the same issue of relevancy and stakes, I should think. And so one of the solutions could be putting the student in the center of it, and then using story and using identity and using character and so on to sort of as a solution to that. So I'm about to show you a product where we've done just that. But so that was one of the things we learned at ISTE. It was kind of like what's the word? It sort of validated our assumptions, you might say, but it's an interesting phenomenon. And then another thing is that you often hear all the teachers almost always say they love history. And then they almost always say, and again, I'm talking about K-12 teachers, middle school teachers, they say they love history personally, but I have a hard time getting my students to love history. And that's an interesting phenomenon as well, because they sort of seem to intrinsically understand the value of history. And like all of us here, I'm assuming everyone who's at an IBHA conference is also kind of passionate about history. We all understand intrinsically how interesting history is, but there's some disconnect between the fact that the teachers are hooked on history and love it, and that the students don't love history, or at least you have to overcome a hurdle to get them to love history. So those were some of the things that I learned talking to a lot of teachers at ISTE. So now, without further ado, let me show you the product, which is called Empires and Interconnections. So I built this originally I built it in 2020 or so, but I built it for the Apple books. And so I was completely constricted to what was the affordances, what's possible working with at that time iBooks Author. And then we were trying to kind of hack iBooks Author to try to get the most feature-rich content we could, or experience out of it we could. So then I essentially spent the last, I guess, 18 months or so rebuilding the entire experience in as a native app for iPad using Unity. Which Unity is one of the leading video game engines. It's called Unity 3D. So essentially, it's a product that I already built, but I rebuilt it with a completely new code base and for a new platform. So the difference between Apple Books and native iOS is that native iOS is it's an iPad app, whereas Apple Books is you are essentially an interactive book that's running on the iBooks app, if you will. So in rebuilding it, what we're able to do is really enhance the experience throughout the whole thing, upgrading all of the interactive features, upgrading the 3D, and just trying to make it a more media-rich experience all the way through from beginning to end. Okay, so having prefaced all of that, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry for bothering you, but are you sharing something now? No?
No, it's all preamble.
No problem. Sorry. One part.
No.
Worrying about that. Okay.
Preamble.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
It's no problem at all. Yeah, thank you. If I was sharing something, that would have been very helpful, because I hate it when that happens. But no, that's a long preamble, and now I'm going to show you the product I've been talking about. So again, it's built with Unity 3D. It's called Empires and Interconnections, and it's a native iPad app. So one last thing I'll say before I show it is that what's really fascinating is actually very recently, with the release of Apple's new M1 chips, any MacBook Pro or iMac, whatever that's running with an M1 chip, can now run an iPad app as a desktop app. You can download it and run it off the desktop. That, to me, as a designer and a developer, is an amazing idea, because what it essentially means is I built this app for iPad, and now it runs perfectly on desktop, which means I've also built a desktop app. So it's a really interesting idea, and it's a brand new thing. All right, without further ado, let me go ahead and fire this up. I'm going to share this with you and then walk you through this experience. And then, okay, let's go. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen window. Here we go. Can you all see my screen? All good? Okay, so I'm going to turn on the audio here. And okay, cool. So what I'm showing you here is the main navigation, the main menu. And this is one of the things we're able to do building with Unity, was we're able to get this kind of interesting nav where you basically have a globe. I'd love to have a lot more characters. Right now we have 6 characters. So the first character here, and we have this cool little UI, little UX experience where you can fly around. This character is Ioannina, and this is taking place at the fall of Constantinople, 1453. This is our character, Louis, and if you click here, you can pop him up there like that. And it's called Warriors of the Clouds. It takes place in mid-16th century, and he's a conquistador. And this is our character of Ishi, in the shadow of leaves in Tokugawa, Japan. Our character of James, called this Land of the Free, 1619, the Jamestown colony. He's the first in our story here. He's the first, or one of the very first African-American slaves in North America, the Jamestown colony. And then here you have Jonas, who's a pirate in the Republic of Pirates. And then here we have Arun, who is a zamindar in modern day, what's it called? Calcutta. And in 1757 is right around the time that the British East India Company is pretty much taking over and conquering India. Although at the time, nobody knew that was going to happen. So that's an important aspect of history, is the contingency and the fact that people don't know what's going to happen. So that's a big part of what we want to show here. So I think I could pick any one of these. I'll jump into the story of Ishii and Tokugawa, Japan. So click here, and then launching into the story. So we have these kind of animated title screens. Again, all this is coming back to engaging students. That's what it's all about, creating a kind of magical textbook. So that feature, we're calling that the cinematograph. It's kind of the idea is, again, a magic textbook. The idea is like of a kind of looping animated screen. And then you get the story. So this is kind of the most old-fashioned kind of choose your own adventure concept. And you're going to read through the story, and essentially what we want to do at this point is how we're trying to essentially get the student invested in this moment, this time and place in history, which again is like, medieval Tokugawa Japan. And we set up a story where she is an advisor to the emperor Tokugawa, and she has to advise them on what to do with these new these Portuguese priests, these interlopers. And as you know, in world history, in this period of history, 1450, 1750, one of the few countries to sort of resist the imperialist wave of European expansion was Japan, right? And one of the reasons why was because they resisted these priests and these people who came there. I'm looking at the question. Any Southeast Asia Pacific history of Austronesian? We do in a previous product, actually. I can talk about that after, actually. But in this particular one, we have the 6 characters I mentioned earlier. And you get to the end of the story, and what we want to do is present the student with a choice, right? And in future iterations, I really want this to be even more immersive, interactive, something I'm working on. But for right now, you basically get 3 buttons. What should Ishii persuade the shogun to do? And if she says to kill the priests, you get this sort of storyline where, in fact, this storyline she's sort of rewarded for. You get a sort of kind of callback to the Scorsese movie Silence, if you've seen that. This was a real thing that they did, in fact, torture and imprison some of these priests and so on. And she has a variety of choices. She can choose to tolerate the priests, which is not received well. Tolerating the priests is kind of a disaster, and it leads to her personal disaster. And then expelling the priests, it's pretty much like a middle. Now, again, the idea is not to say that any one answer is correct or incorrect. Actually, it's more to show the cause and effect, the unpredictability of history. And this is, again, coming back to the idea of wicked problems, which is kind of the title of my talk here. And as I go through the problems, we try to present all of the different characters. It's always meant to be a wicked problem. By that, I mean, it's not an easily framed problem. It's not obvious. You don't know what will happen. There's not a right and a wrong answer, actually. There's just trade-offs, right? Okay, so the next feature here is this interactive feature. And then in this case, we built a kind of 360 panorama for each one of the 6 characters. You can jump in here and you get to kind of explore around. In every case, we have different artwork. We want the student to explore this 360 experience on an iPad, and now on a desktop. And these are all kind of what we call points of interest. And as they click around, they're learning more about the period and the time in history. And they all accompanied by sound effects, etc. One thing I do want to show you is this kind of menu. So a menu is not that exciting, probably to most people, but for me, I love this menu. It's very hard to build. So I'm a fan of this menu. You can jump out and you jump back in. like that. And every time you do, the music changes. Okay, so then jumping over here, this is we have this narrator feature where it's kind of like in a museum where the narrator will kind of explain things to you.
Did you know that Japan was a closed country for over 200 years? The policy of isolation was introduced by the Tokugawa shogunate in the middle of the 17th century to stop European missionaries and traders entering Japan and threatening the Japanese way of life. The policy worked, and Japan never succumbed to the spread of European empires.
Yeah, so we have a number of those throughout. Again, it's kind of concept, similar to in a museum where you have kind of a guide by your side. I like the feature. I like the potential of the feature of having just-in-time information. And we can talk about it later, but I think AI tools have potential for things like this. Okay, clicking on the map. This is probably the single biggest thing that we changed in rebuilding this product from Apple Books to with Unity as a native iOS app, is that we were able to get this kind of more like a civilization type experience. So you can kind of move around a more realistic, not realistic, but a more game, like it's got more of a quality, it's got more of a high fidelity game feeling. Same idea of kind of points of interest. And as you read through, you're getting high quality images and text. And we're all, at the end of the day, it's always about trying to get the student exploring, learning about history, being interested in history. We have a few interactive features like this one where you can kind of go through time here and look at these different routes. And we've got some sound effects in the background you might hear. On the maps that are more expansive, the sound changes more. When you go dramatic, when you change in geography more dramatically, we have different kind of sound effects changes. In the Japan story, not so much because the map is relatively small area that it's focused on. Okay, so then closing this one, now you can also click this to get this back up as well, and then click closing this. And then we have this kind of, we kind of rebuild this feature as a kind of, to look almost like an Instagram feed. We call this the gallery, but I think the design innovation I'm most proud of here is that it kind of looks like an Instagram feed. And again, we're trying to, hopefully the students will recognize it as something they're used to kind of scrolling through and enjoy this kind of, this intuitive scrolling experience. And then you're encountering different images, historical images, like in this one or in this one, and then you're just reading about it and learning more about this period of time in history. And then this is what we're calling, this feature we call the source analysis. And in every case, we do this a little differently. The idea is that's actually another thing we learned at ISTE, but I've actually heard that before, is the idea of getting the students involved. How can you get them to think like a historian or think like they're part of it with different types of lean in or creative activities? So I would say this is kind of a step in that direction, and we could do more with this. But basically, the idea is to look at a primary source document. In this case, this is an old painting, and then basically trying to click through the different points of interest to try to identify what are these elements and why are they important and so on. But the key idea being a historian would do this, would be to analyze or look at closely a source document and try to make sense of it and annotate it and so on. So that's the concept there. And again, in every chapter, we have a different source analysis. And then at the end, we have kind of a test. This is probably it's obviously assessment, very important, but it's probably the least innovative, you might say. It's kind of an old-fashioned kind of multimedia test, but which image shows the setting of this narrative, right? And then obviously that's the right answer and so on. And given the amount of, jumping back out here again. And then you can jump from here back into the main menu. And from here, you can explore the other 5 character narratives. I'll just show you a little bit of the preamble here. So that's the cover. Right, we redid the cover. I like the cover a lot more now. Let me show you this video. I'll show you this video.
In the 300 years between 1450 and 1750, European trading empires enabled by technological advances landed across the world's oceans and exerted their influence over local populations, from America to India and beyond. Europe's rapid expansion did not go unchallenged. From the Peruvian mountains to the Bay of Bengal and the castles of Tokugawa, Japan, people tried to make sense of the arrival of Europeans. Some fought, others lost their independence, a few held out and kept the explorers at a distance. This edition of History Adventures, World of Characters, examines this crucial moment in early modern history through the experiences of 6 characters who were there. Every character had to make a choice about where they would fit in this shrinking world. Will have to decide where you stand in this new world of empires and interconnections. Would you fight for your independence or take your chances? The stories of our 6 characters challenge you to think, what would I have done? And this is the best question about the past you can ever ask.
Yeah, so conceptually, I do believe that the best question you can ask about the past being what would I have done, meaning put yourself in history and appreciate the high stakes of history, that the folks living in history were just like you, that they had no idea what was going to happen. And they had difficult choices to make. Questions like this: how do I protect my culture? Where do I belong in this new world? What does the future hold? What does freedom mean to me? Are you ready to explore the world? What would I sacrifice for fortune and fame? I think about that with regard to a lot of the conquistadors and so on. But you get the idea. There were a lot of questions being asked in this 300-year period, 1450 to 1750, and nobody. And again, to make history interesting and relevant, how can you project the student back into this period, this time, and make it feel real, authentic? And we have more of this sort of.
As the Europeans traversed the world's oceans, connecting continents and cultures that had previously been distant and unknown, the people of the world were increasingly thrown together. Traditions clashed, technologies changed the world, whilst new boundaries, borders, and trade routes crisscrossed the globe. People moved, sometimes willingly, but all too often against their will, taking with them ideas, memories, and cultures that would have profound influences on their new homes. Their stories would change the fate of Europe and the New World in ways that we are still experiencing today.
And here, this is kind of old, a little more old-fashioned, but basically kind of, key terms. From a style perspective, I like that we put it in black and white. I have a, good team of UI folks. Actually, my lead UI designer is named Lana, and she's in Ukraine. She's actually working with us through the war in Ukraine and still doing great work, believe it or not. And she was the one who came up with the idea of putting it in black and white, which I really liked. I think it looks cool. But again, a kind of old, flashcards, keywords. So that's my kind of tool. I could basically show. I can jump you to the end here if you like, and I can just show you that the team is from all over the world here, and you can see the credits in the background and the team that I've worked with on this. Quite a big team. You can see there's writers, there's illustrators, there's 360 panorama illustrators, and the folks I work with are from all over the world. Motion graphics designers, UI folks, music, sound, some marketing, and then the 3D port, which is the thing I really took me like 18 months to do, which is again to rebuild it from Apple Books as a native app with using Unity 3D. And I worked with a great team for that, including Guillaume, who's a French developer who's in Japan. Believe it or not, he lives in Japan. And here's just more kind of stuff. And you can sort of find links to follow us there. And then this one is an addition that we made as a result of feedback. And this is basically teachers saying, you know, if I want to know more about this, or if there's things I encounter and I want to track them down and so on, we put a dedicated website page on on History Adventures just called /sources, where you can the teacher can go and find all the original sources for everything. And then Explore Further is another idea that I think is important and that we could do even more with, which is the idea that, again, coming back to the idea that we're trying to get them hooked on history or curious about history, that let's say, okay, now you've gone through the story about Ioannina and the fall of Constantinople, and now you're interested in that period of history, right? And so now we want to show you kind of multimodal, if you will, resources, and not saying you just have to read books, which of course books are great, like this book we're recommending here, Byzantium, The Surprising Life of a Medieval Empire. Great book, but you don't just have to read a book. You could play the game Assassin's Creed Revelations, which actually takes place in the period, I think it's before the fall of Constantinople, but it really does immerse you in that period. Or you could listen to the podcast, The History of Byzantium. And you get the idea that, to show them that you don't have to be too, that you can be open in terms of what mode of medium that you're going to explore further. Maybe a Netflix docudrama series will do a good job of just getting you hooked, which, by the way, is something I could add in here. There's a nice new Netflix series that came out since I put this list together. If you've seen it, it's about Mehmed II. I think it's called The Ottomans. I should put that in there. And that's it. So then that is the product. Oh, and then actually at the very end we have at the end what we have here is a kind of appendix of production artwork. So you can see the work going through various stages, this being one early draft of Ishii there, and then more early work of Ishii. And this is some of this is cutting room floor stuff. Like I'm not that crazy about this. So we kind of put it in the back just to show the production process. Like this didn't make it into the piece, but it was an interesting kind of attempt to do a photorealistic look of the character and different ideas for what Louis could look like, the conquistador, and playing around with the different armor and stuff like that, the armor, the weapons. His particular character, the idea is that he's one of the losers of history. So instead of being like Pizarro, who becomes very famous and everything, he actually, in both of his storylines, he kind of leads to ignominy and defeat. And in one of them, he just kind of dies in the rainforests of 16th century Peru. So in this concept, we have him kind of sick and dying of some mysterious jungle disease. And that didn't make it into the piece, but we put it in the back here. Photorealistic kind of take, and then Ioannina. Here, this is Ioannina as Tippi Hedren from The Birds. So that's the kind of quote here, if anyone knows The Birds. And Tippi Hedren in that film are kind of like recreating her her pose, and she's sort of running from the walls of Constantinople. Why would she be in front of the walls while they're getting bombarded? That's a different question. That's artistic license, I guess. And then here's Jonas. And actually, Jonas went through, what's interesting, I think, with character design is characters go through a lot of different looks and feels. And this one, he kind of looks a bit like a young Keith Richards. And that was kind of kind of fun. This one was, again, thrown out. I didn't really like that very much. But the idea was he was like, okay, he's dying of scurvy, right? Because scurvy was a real thing. So, and then our artist got a little too carried away and almost made him into a zombie. But the idea is that he had scurvy, and different ways that a rune could look, more a rune takes on a rune, and then a photorealistic take on a rune. And then you can see other stuff. So we did Revolutions and Industrialization. This is on Apple Books and Chromebook. And Plague of Athens, which I wanted to show you. I think I'm out of time, but I was going to show you that too. That I built that for Chromebook, and then also built that for VR. And I was going to show you, if I have time, I can show you a sneak preview of the VR version of Plague of Athens. And then something I'm working on developing right now is Black Death, which would be the sequel to the Plague of Athens. And that is my presentation. I hope I finished on time.
Yeah, thank you so much. That looked awesome and joyful. And I just downloaded your app on my iPad.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's provided for free.
It is provided for free because it's from grant. We use grant funding to build it, and as of right now, I'm just giving it away for free. I think that actually hurts our download numbers because people see it's for free and they go, "Oh, it must not be." But we actually, the production budget of it is quite high, so I think it's a reverse psychology thing. If people see it for free, they think it's not as valuable. They would like, "Why would you give that away for free?" But that's what we're doing. We're giving it away for free.
Yeah, that's very great achievement.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And so there are a few additional questions from CK.
Do you want me to read should I go
through
the one, or should I wait for them to ask?
Yeah, please. Any Southeast Asian and Pacific Oceanian characters like the history of the Austronesian?
Oh. Sure. Yeah. Great. I was getting mixed up between the chat and the Q&A. Okay, the Q&A. So the question is, should I go with the first one? No, that was your question. Okay. Any Southeast Asian and Pacific Oceanian characters? So in my in the previous one we did, it's called Revolutions and Industrialization, covers the period from 1750 to 1900. We have a character in that story who's Aboriginal, living in Australia at the Bay of Botany when the Australians arrive, and we tell his story, and that's one that we have that tells that side of the story, and we try to show that dramatic clash of cultures and really tragic story. Thinking through my whole set of characters. Let's see here. At this point, I've developed about 16 characters. But for Empires, again, it's the character of Yewanina is sort of, she's meant to be kind of mixed culturally, but she's essentially European woman living in Constantinople, 1453. Louis is Spanish, mid-16th century. Ishi is Japanese, Tokugawa, Japan. And James, who that's not his real name, that's the name he's given, because actually, to know his story, he was first abducted by Portuguese slave traders and then subsequently sold to British colonists in Jamestown. And then eventually he gets the Anglican or English name. Obviously he's African American. Jonas is European pirate, and then Arun is Indian in Calcutta in the mid 18th century. So anyway, I could go through all the characters, but there's not as far we need more characters. So that's something I'm hoping to do, is basically to be able to just keep making more characters. I call it the world of characters, but I only actually have 15 characters because right now it takes so long to make these things. And what I'm actually most interested in at this moment is how can I speed it up? Because that's one of the another thing we've learned from research and talking to a lot of teachers is that they're like, wow, that's really great. Now, where's, how much of it do you have? How much of my curriculum and the content I have to cover do you have for me? And then we show them we have, and it's not enough. So that's something I have to solve, is how to have more content without sacrificing quality. So I want a lot more characters, is what I'm trying to say. Should I do the next question?
Yes.
Or any other questions?
Yes. Yeah. Next question is from CK, the same guy. What is your projection or vision for the interactive animation or game in the age of AI? Will humanity just spend more time on animation or game, since having a job like in the industrial age will be gone soon?
It's a big question. Yeah. Well, there's a few ways I'm thinking about AI right now, a few different levels. In terms of utility, actually, just in terms of what it can do in terms of multimedia production, to augment and help multimedia production, is quite exciting for someone like me who spends an enormous amount of time trying to make original animation and characters and illustration and sound design and all these things. Even just iterating through character design with a concept artist is enormously time consuming. It's fun work, but there's a lot of I don't want to say drudgery, but it's a lot of hard work in there. And AI for multimedia production has a tremendous promise to speed things up and to make things more powerful with less money and a smaller team. So that part of AI I'm excited about. There's a lot of ramifications of that too. I think there's going to be a lot of bad content being made too, because if it also means that folks who don't really know what they're doing as much can make a lot of stuff fast. And I think we're going to see kind of a inflation of content everywhere, and we'll have the problem of curation. That's not a new thing, but I think that will become worse, or it'll become a bigger issue is curation than it already is. So that's one thing. That's the utility of AI for media production, which I'm genuinely excited about. Then the other part of your question is how people are interacting with interactive or products, and that's very interesting. I mean, for example, Apple just released, they've just put out their own headset. They're calling it spatial computing now, which is just another way of saying VR, right? But now they're getting into the game, whereas Meta's already spent many, many billions of dollars developing Oculus, and now it's called MetaQuest, and developing that as a new segment. But now Apple's getting into it. And the fact that Apple's getting into it legitimates the sector a lot more. What's possibly dangerous there is just getting people more isolated than ever. Getting young people just on their headsets instead of engaged in the world. That definitely you see an obvious potential downside there. But on the flip side of it, you can also see how, because I'm in the process of building, and I'm almost done building a new VR app for education, which again is called Plague of Athens VR. And I can tell you that I think the most powerful VR educational experience that you can create the most powerful, I think, educational experience about history that you can create is VR. That's what I think now, having built it, having spent like over a year building one. Why? Because you don't have to explain anything. You can just drop the student right there. You could spend an hour giving a lecture on, let's just say, ancient Rome, or what the people were like of ancient Rome, or let's say just the ordinary people and street life in ancient Rome. You could do that in describing things very well and clearly, and that's fascinating to me. It's the kind of stuff I love. But you could also just drop them right into an authentic recreation of ancient Roman street life. and just let them hang out there, looking at the people walking by and looking at the architecture and the layouts of the streets and everything. That has got to be, in many ways, the future of history education. What's the problem is that it's not accessible. This is very expensive. These headsets are very expensive. They're very difficult to build for. There's not a lot of content for them. So there's a tremendous potential, and then there's also the downside, which is more isolation. People just connected to devices and not engaging with the world. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. Will humanity just spend more time on like in or games since having a job? And that's another part of your question is since having a job like in the industrial age will be gone. Well, that's a whole different thing. I think that's like the third question embedded in your question. That one it's less within my expertise of designing digital learning products, but that's something a lot of people are talking about now is how AI will disrupt jobs and what people do. I'm not sure that that's going to change that soon. 5, 10, 15 years, we can talk about whether or not what classes of jobs are gone. So that's a different question, I think, but interesting to talk about.
Yeah, there's new comments in the chat.
Okay. School libraries sometimes have fewer offices. Yeah, that's correct, Mark. If it's okay, do you want me to show some of the VR experience I built? If we have time. Is that okay? All right, I'll show you it. Let me just fire up the video here. And before I do, just a quick preamble. Yes, I believe that, again, as I said, I believe that VR has tremendous potential for history education, and then there's an accessibility issue that's a real thing because they're very expensive and hard to get your hands on, they're hard to build for, but very powerful. All right, let me go ahead and show you this piece I just put together here. 1 second here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again and give you a walkthrough of, again, as of right now, unreleased. This is a screen capture from a demo build that is unreleased. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I can bring the volume down a little bit. And then I literally just recorded. This is one of the most recent builds. It's 15 minutes. We don't have to go through the whole 15. In fact, cut me off whenever I've gone on too long here. But I'll just give you kind of a little director's commentary of this. I hope to release this later in the summer or early in fall. So actually, when I turned it on right now, we have the version on, which is the study mode is on. So now I turn the study mode off, which means that in the actual experience, what I want the users to see when they come here is that everything is in darkness in this kind of museum. We're calling it the kind of magical museum. And you have no choice but to go back into the past. And so what you're doing here is you're jumping into essentially the streets of Athens during the worst part of the plague of Athens. So you can see the crows everywhere, and then the people are sick and they're lying everywhere.
Nikos of Athens grew weary as an unknown pestilence tormented his great city. Bodies lined the streets, victims of an illness that burned from the head down, choking victims in their own blood as it ravaged their body. Even the crows left the corpses.
So what we did here, I'll kind of bring my volume down a little bit, but this is another kind of idea of points of interest. You can click on that. You'll learn about funeral pyres. The concept is sort of kind of the Christmas carol.
Into chaos, Nikos walked on.
I'll turn off the volume just because this competing audio can be difficult. But basically, we've got sound effects here. We've got a narrator. as you're walking through, it's kind of the idea of almost like a Christmas Carol. It's like we call it a frozen time, where you are on the outside and you're walking around, but you're watching the character go through their experiences, like at different moments in his walk. And the character is Nikos of Athens, and he's trained in the Hippocratic Oath, and he's a physician from ancient Greece, trained in the Hippocratic Oath. And here, more points of interest. You're learning about the demos, or the people, and the first, famously the first kind of experiment in democracy. And one thing I'm proud of is just kind of getting the streets to look more gritty, really trying to get them close together. We got a lot of graffiti on the walls. We have these crows. We're using the history of the Peloponnesian War as one of the primary sources for this, because that's the primary source for learning about the plague of Athens, written by Thucydides. And so he talks about the crows, believe it or not, as gruesome as that is, because it was a combination of both. You have a war and you have a plague. So it was a really terrible time at this time in Athens. Here, I like this. You can jump into this sort of side little alley here. All of this is taken from the headset. So I basically just recorded my headset experience. So you can click on this point of interest, learn about ancient Greek pottery. And then you're kind of jumping back and forth between the story of Nikos and then kind of just learning about this period and moment in history. And then from here, you can kind of jump back into the museum. And so we kind of get introduced to Nikos, and then he's going to, from here, jump back into the museum. And when he gets back to the museum, everything will be, the lights will all be turned on. So here, jumping back here. So now we're into the museum, and now you get to explore the museum. This is a transition. We probably need a little something that says transition. Okay, so this, I like that. Basically, these are all various 3D models that, this is basically like an experience of being in a museum. I think, again, in the VR headset, this is really good stuff. It really feels really real. It's very much like a virtual museum experience. You can play with scale really easily in VR. So what I mean to say is, like, later I'll show you, we can make any object really as big as we want, which is interesting. So you can make a sculpture, which is typically, it might have been a normal size. You could make it huge. You could make it as big as the Colossus of Rhodes if you want to. There's no cost to making things bigger or smaller. And then here we have this theater. Once you jump up to get up to the top, once I turn around camera around, this is kind of theater. You should hear audio here. Huh. It says no. You should be hearing audio. Interesting. The audio didn't record for some reason. But in any event, then we have an interactive timeline, so you can kind of jump around through history with this interactive timeline. How can you make history just feel more kinetic? Like, you can drag the timeline around. And I'll just skip ahead. So this is more of the magical museum. And then here you jump back into the story. So if you click on this, you're going to go back into the story.
The buildings around Nikos became richer and better maintained as he entered the more prosperous part of the city. He hurried.
But at this point, what happens is I don't have the because this is a demo. This is a developer build. We don't have the correct voice acting in this part yet. So you don't hear the nice voice acting you heard in the first one. Instead, you hear the AI voice. But I'll just get to the part where we get into the wicked problem. Okay, so we kind of get up to the top of the stairs here, and you're meant to be in this rich senator's home. His name is Galxyz, and again, you're the physician, and you're going to a house, call. You're going to see him, and he's sick and he's dying, and then we have to present in a way a challenge, a choice for the student. In this case, he is telling you that he's in so much pain, he's suffering, and he's asking you to end his life. So really, he's asking you to do an assisted suicide in essentially like 4th century Athens. And because you're sworn to the Hippocratic Oath, this is a very difficult choice for you, because one of the most famous phrases in that is to do no harm, right? And so are you doing harm or not doing harm in this case? And so we kind of present that as a difficult choice for the user. And then if you get to the end here, you can see if you go that path, you'll kind of help him out, ease him on his way. And this path, where you see the rod of Asclepius, you're going to say, no, I can't do it, and according to my vows, which were quasi-religious, believe it or not, I can't do that. And then, of course, then he curses you and he gets really mad. And then from there, you go back to the museum, you explore the museum more, and you live with that decision. And yeah, that's the product. It's still in development, and hope to release it earlier in the fall. There's more to it, but I think that's a pretty detailed sneak preview. In the last part here, you get into, we kind of like this Oracle of Delphi kind of dream sequence, which we're still building. So, yeah. That's Plague of Athens VR.
Yeah, thank you. Great. And there's one additional question from CK. And can you see it? Just now you mentioned about.
Oh, sure. We are shifting from physical. Oh, is that the question? We are shifting, or no? It's in Q&A. I'm looking at the chat. Okay, good. Just now you mentioned. Okay, no problem. Just now you mentioned about students who are not interested in history because they cannot see themselves in the story. So in your version of VA, can you adapt both the physical and spiritual, emotional characteristics into the virtual characters? In your version of, by VA, I think you mean VR. Mm-hmm. Well, I've tried. Let's see here. VR, got it. Can we do that? That's what we really tried to do with this, with the design of this particular app. So with Plague of Athens VR, we're trying to get you to experience as you say, the emotional, difficult choice that Nikos of Athens has to make. Earlier, I said it was kind of like, what do you call it? Christmas Carol. Why did I say that? Because it's sort of like, if you remember in Christmas Carol, like he has the ghosts of past, present, future, but they kind of guide him along, and then they allow him to look at his life. And now he's looking at his life, and now he's looking at his life. And that's kind of the concept. You're like the outside, you're disembodied, but then you're looking at the character of Nikos in these frozen time moment events, and you're seeing him go through his experience in the world. But then every now and then, you see him at a difficult moment where he has to make a difficult choice, and then you step in and you have to make the choice. So I'd say so the answer to your question is yes, you can, but that's how we've been designed it. And I think we could design it better. You can always do things better, but that's the best I've been able to come up with so far. So I think it works, but I honestly feel like I could still do better. I mean, the physical and spiritual, emotional care. Yeah. Oh, of the students. Yeah. So same idea. Again, everything is limited by time, money, design, innovation. So there's a lot that's possible. There's the affordances of the platform, and then there's what you can pull off. So we did this on a pretty small budget. We made this thing for like, I don't know, probably so far $50,000 is how much I made. It's taken me to build Plague of Athens VR, which in a year of work, which is a very small amount of money to do an original VR project from scratch. I have friends or industry friends who, when they learned what my budget was, they just laughed out loud because it's so small. They're working with millions and millions of dollars to build things. But nevertheless, I think if you're really focused and you make good choices, you can make that money go a long way. And that's what I've tried to do.
Thank you. And so let me talk about continued part of my answer to the first question from Max Barnett. Thank you for speaking up. And I think so. You originally wanted to make a more fundamental question, and I guess I did not fully answer to your question. So I want to make some supplementary comments on your question, and I have two things to add. The first is the essential nature or feature of big history is entireness, and so big history is encompassing the whole thing, all of things, and in terms of that, so we still lack evidence of life on another planets. And so that's the reason why we have to be, our narrative, our big history narrative have to be Earth-centric one, because we do not have any evidences on life on other planets. But once we get something, so firm evidence, life exists on other planets, then so we can start comparison of life. So, and we can diversify multi-planetary story and life comparison of civilization. And so that's one of the biggest missing link. And second, so thinking about humans, cultures, and natures in the context of the universe. My my basic understanding of the big history is that the death enables our lives. So as you know well, so elements are fragments of dead bodies of stars. But not only that, so for farming, soils are essential, fundamental conditions for farming. But that soils can be formed only on Earth because for shaping soils, we essentially need the dead body of living organism. That's the reason why we cannot find any soils on the moon and on Mars. And then, so there was industrial revolution, and we started using fossil fuel very much, but that fossil fuels, the coals and oils, and they are also formed by dead bodies of living organisms. So they are fossils of dead bodies of living organisms. And so speaking about collective learning, and for me, the essence of collective learning is that working together with the dead. Most of our knowledge was formed and shaped by the dead. Today, I talk about Musha Koji, and so he also passed away last year. And like that, so we are here, we can exist thanks to many, so countless amount of the dead, including humans and non-humans. So that's true even at a cosmic scale. So that's my answer. Thank you. And then, so please, so we have still about 30 minutes. So if you have any question, any comments, they are welcome and they are appreciated. So anything else? Oh, there's one question. So what do you mean? Is this scary?
What do you mean? Is this scary? Referring to? Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. From physical. This is a VR question.
Oh, so
Is
you will stick to that.
okay. The way I think that presentation didn't happen. I think Mark's asking, did that presentation not happen, Professor Nobuo?
Yeah, so the station did not appear here, and I don't know the reason, but he missed this panel. And I sent him an email, but there's no reply right now. And sorry for that if you are looking forward to seeing his presentation.
I'll answer the question from physical reality to virtual. I'm sorry. The question being, is this scary from physical reality to virtual reality? Well, I mean, I think there's been a lot of talk about that in the media lately. I'll try to stick to the digital learning design part, which is relevant to my talk here. Is this scary? Again, I think it's tremendous potential. On the one hand, tremendous potential to create powerful, immersive, embodied experiences, and particularly for history education. If you can recreate a moment, a place, and time in history, and then place a student there, I mean, just think about how much more powerful that is than having them read a chapter in a lecture. Not to say that that's not important. That is still important. That's a different modality of learning. I think you need all of it. I think you need have them read the chapter, have them listen to the lecture, but then placing them in that place and time. That's the key to getting it to all make sense and click and become relevant and interesting. So the other side of it, while conceptually that's incredibly powerful, it's also difficult to do. It's very difficult to build. It's expensive, and so and then it's also expensive to build and to get the devices for everybody. And then finally, the scary part is possibly just people just becoming more isolated by their devices, and all of us just living in little experience chambers and never leaving the front door. That is a possible kind of dystopian outcome to think about. The Plague of Athens VR was scary and depressing. The museum was happy. Yeah. Well, it's a depressing moment in history. So I think we made it. We couldn't make it much more cheery and upbeat than that. In the sense that it's it's really the first recorded pandemic, arguably global pandemic, because Athens is connected to North Africa, and there's their international trading port, and the plague probably came through the port of Piraeus. So it's like the world's first kind of global pandemic. Even if it's regional, it's a part of an interconnected world. So is it scary? Yeah, it's scary. I mean, there's no way around it. It's kind of dark. Like you said, the museum is it gets you away from the storyline, which is pretty dark, and it gets you into kind of more of like you said, it's more upbeat. It's more of like, okay, now let's just learn about this period of time in this magical museum. So it's kind of separated a bit from the story. Personally able to experience the disease itself. Well, hopefully not the actual feeling of having the disease, but a visceral experience of appreciating how horrible it was, I think is part of what we're after. I guess parents will have to sign waivers. That's an interesting idea. Yeah, I mean, whenever you deal with topics that are too heavy, then of course, then parental waivers come into play. So that's true, because it's not for everybody. It's definitely, you have to be careful of what students are ready for it emotionally. And that's at the discretion ultimately of the teacher and the parents and everything in the schools. But we didn't try to go, it's not like The Exorcist or something. It's more like, it's just like an authentic representation of, you know, I wouldn't say it's completely authentic. I would say it's like a, what's the word? It's kind of, it's a very similitude. It's a stylized portrait of reality, but it's not meant to be so dark that a middle school student couldn't handle it, but definitely they'll come away with the sense of, wow, that was an intense moment in time in history. And you're probably right. I think waivers may come into play. But I've already play tested it in middle schools here in Doha and at 5 different middle schools. And we had students sign waivers, but that was not to do with the content. Actually, that was just because when you're doing user testing with students, and you're going to collect data. In this case, what is their experience of the app? That's IRB rules, or Institutional Research Board rules, that they have to sign waivers that we're collecting data. In this case, anonymous data about their experience of the app. So they sign waivers in that sense. But other than that, the kids and the parents, or the teachers in this case, they weren't troubled by that content because they've seen worse than that. But it is dark. I'm not going to lie. It is dark. Is that the question to me or to my colleague?
Probably to you.
Is it possible? Okay. Is it possible with religious characters together with the myth? Well, actually, in the Plague of Athens storyline, there is a kind of semi-mystical or religious element to the whole thing, because at one point in the experience, I kind of glossed over it, but you encountered the actual Hippocratic Oath in the museum. And so you're able to look at an ancient kind of, parchment, if you will, like, kind of a preserved Hippocratic Oath from 4th century Greece, and it's obviously in Greek. So what you do is you just click on the annotations to translate it, and you can see what the content of the actual original Hippocratic Oath is all about. And it's part kind of like the very beginning of medical ethics and practical advice about how to deal with patients and best practices and what they've learned along the way. So part of it is just like practical manual for doctors, and the concept, the famous phrase about to do no harm. Obviously don't leave the patient, your intervention should not leave the patient worse off than when you found them. I mean, it's interesting. It's common sense in a way, but it's not always been followed by doctors in history. So that's one part of it. But then the other part of it is actually quite mystical, and it's all wrapped up in their, in ancient Greek mythology and religion. And so the god of healing was Asclepius. Asclepius was the son of Apollo, and he was the god of healing. And they really did worship the god of healing. They worshiped Apollo and they worshiped Asclepius. So there is a whole religious element to the whole thing, which is really, in a way, indecipherable, I think, to me personally. I can't really fully appreciate how they would have viewed that, but that's because it's impossible to put yourself to completely understand the mentality of a 4th century BC doctor in ancient Greece who had never been exposed to all the things that I've learned growing up in 21st century. So there is already this idea of religion, mysticism, mythology bound together with practical ideas of medicine. We tried to convey that, but obviously we could do more, but that's already kind of in the story. We want the students to appreciate that, understand that. But at the end of the day, it's about education for me, and I think that's the most important thing. I want them to take away from it that distinction between, okay, there's the history of medicine, there's the history of medical ethics, there's the history of disease and pandemics, and then there's the history of religion and Greek mythology, and ultimately to present a character who's experiencing those things, but then also to step away and objectively take what are we taking away from this, so that they're getting, in a way, hopefully the most thoughtful educational takeaway, if you will. There's a question for you, Professor.
Yes, thank you so much. And there's one question I did not answer. Thank you, CK. Are the different spirits in multiculturalism and one spirit in multinaturalism an extension from the cosmic evolution of the Big Bang? Yes, I think so. All right, then. So, there's a question from Professor Hirofumi Katayama. Nobuo, you try to make big history multi-natural. What is the one spirit in multi-naturalism from big history perspective? Yeah, that's a related question. Yes, I think it's a continuation of evolution of mind and consciousness in the evolution of the universe and life. And so all living organisms have to perceive and notice, and so their inner and outer environments, and then they have to cope with and essential problems for that. So they have to maintain their body temperature, or they have to feed something, or they have to make a judgment on so who are enemy, who are the same species, and what are foods, what are poisons, and something like that. And so as far as I understand, so one spirit here mentions common and continuous background of our consciousness and mind and related abilities. And from CKH, we are a form of multi-naturalism. And yeah, so if VR bring us a unique experience and unique worldview and quite different view of the world, that may be a part of so different various appearances of nature. But before that, I think so what Professor Spencer Stryker has engaged in is so multi-form expression of big history, and that's one of the most important things I think battery need for our community and our movement. So our productions are not limited to just books and articles, and so all kinds of creation and production are welcome and are needed. And so we can stop creativity that are inherent to humanity, and no one can disturb so creating something like this app or movies like Avatars and Star Wars, and that's very human phenomena, I think. And so big history, so for me, so big history is the best and most enjoyable field to do that. And so in the future, I want to collaborate more and more people, and I call it the cosmic feast. Thanks. And plus, why we are excited with the new form of naturalism, we also feel scary. So this is question to Striker or to me. Me. So at the moment, I'm not so scared by this kind of things. And yeah, there are, of course, there may be positive things and negative things on this kind of technology, but it is still not so common and it is not penetrated in many people's daily lives. And yeah, I'm not so scared right now.
Okay, the question being, while we are excited with the new form of multinational VR, we also feel scary. Well, I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Let's see here. Multinaturalism. Make sure I understand the definition of that one. That's an interesting question. Yeah, again, I think we kind of spoke to this a bit. Yeah, again, from with Apple getting into this segment with their new Vision Pro, and with Meta Quest not going away, they're just going to continue. Meta will continue to produce new VR hardware, and there'll be a software ecosystem. We're seeing what they're now calling spatial computing, right? Which is really just VR. It's like a rebranding of it. It's becoming a new segment. It's actually the most dramatic thing that Apple's done in their own in years, I should say, probably since Watch. I guess, if you think about it, iPhone, iPad, Watch, and now to come up with Vision Pro is like a new segment, spatial computing. The fact that they're getting into it in a way legitimates the sector. So it will become more and more of a hot topic in that sense, because usually what happens is the price will follow, the price will come down, and the products will get more robust. So a long way of saying, as this segment expands, we will contend with your question, which is how will it affect how children interact with technology, and whether or not, and how that will affect interpersonal skill. I think that's really an open question, because I think you could make an argument either way. You could say that VR could actually increase your interpersonal skills. You can simulate in VR, very realistic experiences. You could learn a new language. You could practice doing interviews. You could practice succeeding in a job, in a negotiation for a raise. You could do that in a VR experience, which would make you ultimately better at interpersonal communications, more confident. But the flip side of it being, what if you never leave the house and it becomes this dystopian thing where we're all just in our experience chambers, wired up, and then that you can see quickly how that becomes this dystopian narrative where spatial computing goes so far that now we're just brains in a jar. Okay, so I think it could go either way. I think the jury is out. We don't know. You could make a case either way. I would say that I don't think children nowadays are too much into VR. I don't think that's true, because I don't think VR has enough. I don't think that VR has a big enough footprint. I think you could definitely say kids are too into screens. You could say they're too into, their iPhones and their just screens generally. I wouldn't say they're too into VR, because I don't think that VR is popular enough right now. It's a little niche right now.
Thank you. And from Hirofumi Katayama, Nobuo, your comment on death is very interesting. Thank you. You mean the life and death is the unifying factors of your big history? Yes, that's axis to organize my big history courses and to write my own monographs in the future. And that's the reason why I have a keen interest in it. Thank you. And anything else? So are all of you satisfied with this panel now? All right. So we went through a long time together. I very much appreciate that. And of course, the attendance and the patient answers of Professor Spencer Stryker. So it's my honor and it's my pleasure to have you all as speaker and as the audiences. So thank you very much. We spent very nice time, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of our conference. Thank you so much.